Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe even good night, wherever you are in the world. My place on the world currently is The Hague in the Netherlands. This is a city somewhere right between Amsterdam and Rotterdam, if that tells you anything. But we like to see it as the center of the country and these other cities really circling around it. Before I go any further, let me give you a little disclaimer about this session. Both the script and the content and the visuals, which are not there anyway. In no case, AI was harmed in generating it. So this is all still human labor involved over here, which nowadays is something you should probably make a disclaimer about. Maybe the other way around as well. If generative AI was used for it, you might have done the same these days. I know it's a corporate guideline with our company. And I like to see it a little bit like vinyl. I have this, if you can see it, I have this little album over here by Metallica, which is their new album. It's called 72 Seasons. It's on vinyl. And the thing is, it's a limited edition. It's actually the indie retail midnight LP. So this is very, very specific limited edition. And we know that most people will stream the album with MP3 and take that type of quality and use it on their phones. But then there's a specific type of experience with this vinyl type of very specific thing. And you have a disclaimer in terms of, hey, this is not digital in this case. And maybe we'll see the same with AI as well. And maybe we'll realize that generative AI sooner or later will be a mainstream thing that we consider as a given. And then maybe if we don't use it, it's something special and we like to remark it. And we have this special, warm, vintage maybe, or high quality perception. Maybe we'll get back to that a little bit later on. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live session with the topic of generative AI. Obviously, and a topic that has been discussed a lot in the past few months. And hopefully we'll have something interesting for you to share today, which adds something to what already is, of course, your own understanding of the topic and your own experiences. To back that up, we have some content that we think is very interesting, and we'll discuss it today. First of all, there is the new release of our innovation magazine that Capgemini Insights and Data publishes. It's called the Data Powered Innovation Review. And the Data Powered Innovation Review, we just released a few days ago, and it is full of interesting topics, and quite a few of them, obviously, these days are about generative AI. So that's one. Secondly, we have our Capgemini Research Institute. We're pretty proud of it because it's quite consistently award-winning type of research institute. And it has done a twin research into generative AI. And the first research document, which was released just a few weeks ago, was all about the consumer's perspective. So this was called, Exploring the Potential of Generative AI, a Consumer's Pulse. So what is the perception of the consumer? And we'll dive a little bit into that. And then by a very happy coincidence, because we thought it would be a little bit later, but just earlier today, the Research Institute also published the follow-up research, which is from a enterprise and corporate perspective. And this is called Harnessing the Value of Generative AI. And it's full of exploration of industry-specific use cases that are most, our most favorite with the companies that we interviewed. So that's a little bit of the content that we are diving in and that we're using as a foundation. But obviously, we have a few excellent speakers with us today as well. We have a very interesting panel, I dare to say. We have Arti Bagul, who is a principal machine learning engineer from Snorkel AI. There's a lot of interesting words over there. And we have my esteemed colleague, Chris Schiefer, who is the intelligent industry lead for Capgemini North America within Capgemini. I would say, Arti, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Snorkel AI, that's an interesting name. There must be a philosophy behind that. And then, of course, what you're doing as a principal machine learning engineer. And maybe you can tell a little bit more also about your favorite generative AI tool to kick things off.
Definitely. Well, really excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Arti. I work at Snorkel. Nothing to do with underwater sports. It's a machine learning platform. So with the craze of large language models and foundation models, you can think of Snorkel as the data layer for adapting these large language models. I know we're going to talk a lot about data and its role in foundation models, but Stronco was a research project at Stanford for 8 years. We spun out as a company a few years ago. It's just much faster data labeling to adapt and fine-tune these models. So happy to chat more about that there. But for me personally, so I work on our field machine learning team. So I lead a team there, and I work directly with our most important customers, helping them deliver on their most strategic AI initiatives. So I know we're going to touch on also enterprise applications of machine learning there. So excited to chat about that as well. And then before that, I worked with Engineering for a number of years, research, helping start some companies, as well as helping develop this course. And favorite we're on real.
Favorite tool. Yeah, favorite tool.
Favorite tool. I feel like I'm just going to stick to the OG ChatGPT here, because I feel like it kicked off a revolution in a way. Like, I think it just introduced a lot of people to the capabilities of generative AI and just educated the world in a way no other tool has. I know, very not a hot take there, but that's what I'm going to go with.
That's excellent, and it is indeed an OG, that's for sure, and definitely is, of course, the foundation of the current breakthrough that we're seeing. So I just like for you, Artie, it's also for Chris, it's quite relatively early in the morning because you're both in the US currently. So good morning, Chris, and could you tell a little bit more about what you're doing and what your favorite generative AI tool currently is?
Yeah, so happy again. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. So I lead our intelligent industry practice here in North America, focused primarily around insights and data and analytics, right? And so we focus on intelligent products, intelligent operations, and new digital, new AI-based services and adjacencies that we create for our companies. I've got a vast background, I would say 20 years in this space, but what does that really mean? Since this is relatively new. So I started really with cognitive theory, probabilistic methods. I'm going to date myself and say that I should do mathematical optimization in Lisp and in MATLAB and others. So that might be a little OG. So spent a tremendous amount of time with clients and others, specifically around that topic. I know we'll share about it. My favorite tool, and no plug, no payment was made to address this, but honestly, on my iPhone, using GPT-4 with Bing, it has been a game changer for me. Honestly, it's an incredible tool, and as a personal productivity, I'm a big fan. So,
right. Well, thanks for that. And yes, some OGs over here, and for the people that don't know what it means, original gangster. It's a thing. It's a thing. Not in every country, probably common language, but that's what it is. That's what it is. Let's start with a topic that is very visible in the first report, and that is democratization of generative AI. So the first report, remind you, was about the consumer's perspective. So we've really been listening to the consumer's pulse. We were interested, outside in, first interested in how is it being perceived. And I have some key findings over here. We don't have it on slides, so I have it on paper. That's all very much part of the vinyl vintage experience that we're creating today. Just a few people talking. There's no avatar here. I actually look like this. I'm sorry about that, but that's what we have to do it with today. Now, there is some very interesting. I found the consumer reports surprising. First of all, it's not so surprising that more than half of all consumers are very much aware of the latest trends in generative AI. That's fine. So you would expect that. Okay, more than half is already very much aware of everything that's happening in that space. But then age categories I found particularly, remarkable. What would you think? I mean, what would be the age generation that adopts this stuff the most? And then it turns out to be baby boomers. Would you believe that? People I guess, are just a little bit older than I am, even, so that's pretty serious. And they are actually have the highest percentage of awareness and have a lot of expectations from the stuff. They're followed by Generation Z. So these are the youngsters. And then somewhere in the middle, we have these poor millennials, right? They are sort of lagging behind a little bit. They have actually less awareness and sort of less practical experience with the stuff. But the thing is, there are not that many differences between the age groups. And I think that's particularly interesting. So whatever age you might have, there is some sort of a similar interest and awareness and even practical experience with generative AI. Now, the use cases that we see particularly, I have them over here, it's usually for creative purposes, right? And we can all relate to that. So it's text, image, video, audio generation, some gaming applications as well. But it's particularly generating content and it's brainstorming. Now, I find these things interesting, and we'll see more findings of the report a little bit later on that are also quite surprising. I frankly didn't see it coming. But Artie, let's first look a little bit at your perspective. You are a maker and a researcher in this field, right? But how do you see this extensive? You've been involved in AI before, right? But now we see this extensive and broad pickup all the way up to baby boomers. I mean, I have neighbors of 76 and 78, and they have an opinion about ChatGPT, right? So this is very broad uptake. So how do you see that in the overall scheme of AI growing in the past few years? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting stats that you mentioned where, across the age groups, you're seeing this wide adoption. And I think one of the key reasons is, of course, the capabilities of these tools are unprecedented. Like we've never had models of this scale having this sort of capabilities. But I think one of the key things that's different is the way to interface with these models, right? So before you would have to, collect this data, have this model, and then, it would be a very specific output. Now we have these general purpose models. And I think the interface to interact with this model is a simple natural language prompt. So you don't need to be a machine learning expert. You just in natural language communicate. So I think with ChatGPT, the thing that took off was, of course, the capability, but also the UX or the interface to communicate with it. And so I think because of all of that, also, the barrier to entry for developers has been lowered, which is why there has been also an explosion of tools coming out where you don't need to be an AI expert to develop these tools. And so that leads to more tools in the market. And so people are now just flooded with a lot of perspectives on like various ways that you can use machine learning in various applications for various domains. And so I think that sort of explosion has been critical as well for this adoption.
So that's quite a key lesson, right? In terms of the ease of use of the thing and having almost no user interface, because I think in the end, particularly if you look at the ChatGPTs of this world or all the creative tools like Midjourney and others, which happens to be my favorite generative AI tool, by the way. I use it for all sorts of different purposes, but and then you're saying the user experience, which is almost fluent because it's natural language. The word says it all. It's natural language. We're using natural language to get things done and express our intentions and have dialogues and communicate. But then, of course, what you said also for the developers, right? So developers find it easier to build these things as well. You're finding that also within your company, the way you look at development, or are you still using a lot of the bare metal tools as well for that?
Yeah, so for us, we work primarily with enterprises and machine learning and data science teams there. So I think the speed of development has definitely accelerated, where you can think of, we like the term foundation models that came out of Stanford, which is like these models provide a very solid foundation for you to go off of, where previously you had to start from scratch for developing any of these applications. So that's more of an enterprise perspective, but we're seeing because all these enterprise leaders have been excited by the opportunity as consumers, and now they're trying to go back to their enterprises and say, how do we use it there? And that's accelerated as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's definitely a very interesting inflection point there that has been created by this, and it happened almost overnight, right? So Chris, I know in practice you've been doing a few very interesting things with generative AI yourself. In the Data Powered Innovation Review issue that we just published a few days ago, you have a very interesting article about how to use this in workshops, and maybe we'll be back on that. But in general, if we look at these usage patterns, right? So we see a lot of creative stuff going on there. A lot of people talk about that. So they're also talking about brainstorming. So what do you think about these different types of use cases, and what do you see around you currently?
So I want to say this. I mean, in building on kind of what Artie said, honestly, the consumerization driving technology and markets, right? We know that that's where the shift has always been. It's like if the consumer's there, then the market and the executives and the companies and others that serve those markets are going to be all in, and that's what I'm hearing, right? So as I look at this across all the C-suites and conferences and other things we've seen, I mean, we're talking like this is the talk of the town. Right. And if we look, even I know we dropped some additional research today from the Capgemini Research Institute and it's shocking, not so shocking, 96% of executives see this as essential to integrate this into their corporate strategy. And many are chasing what we call first mover advantage, right? And they see, honestly, AI as a key to building that competitive advantage, and honestly, to access new growth streams. From a usage, if I look at from usage side, one thing is clear: generative AI and these large language models will dramatically, change the way work is performed in the business environment. In fact, if I think of from a consumer perspective, it quite literally will reshape the customer journey, from brand awareness to acquisitions to retention. I mean, I can't underscore this enough. I mean, I'll go through to some other studies and others from like the World Economic Forum, right? Because I do truly believe that this will be wholesale change for both the knowledge worker, not just the consumer, right? But the knowledge worker and creatives, right? Because we talked a lot about how that's going to change and adjust. Even the World Economic Forum, Goldman Sachs, they're talking about altering and changing over 300 million jobs in the next decade. I mean, if you think about that, that's 30% of the global workforce. But the good news of that is that it states that just as many jobs will be created. And then there's an estimated $2 trillion of GDP that these companies can chase. If I look at usage patterns, I've got 4. I'll try to shorten a little bit and be a less brevity here, but and you touched on this, right? So personal productivity, right? Generative AI is already here. It's embedded in everything. Look at Office 360 Copilot, Google Workspace, Salesforce, my financial apps of Bloomberg GPT and Morgan Stanley, you name it. They're already in this space. They're already, and I also say this too, yes, Clippy, the Microsoft Office paperclip, she's back and she is amazing. Right?
That's scary. That's scary, Yes.
So a couple other things I'll touch on too, like democratization of app development. From a consumer lens, you can go from zero to e-commerce selling in under 10 minutes. I'm not underscoring that at all. Like from a napkin, especially with GPT-4, with multimodal and an open AI codex of over 30 language. I mean, it's just incredible. If I think of consumers directly, and this is kind of a big one too, is I think I see this as becoming, and we'll talk about this in terms of the shocking results of the boomer generation doing massive adoption of these tools in our research.
They can remember Clippy for sure. I mean, that's.
So, but this is for that generation. I see this as becoming or redefining search, but in a different way, right? So more curated, more contextualized. Think of Q&A style, because honestly, when I get on the Googly, I need to know something. I'm trying to answer a question. I don't need a URL, right? And the same type of Q&A can teach you. It's a conversational approach to a recommendation engine.
Isn't that very interesting? Because what you're actually describing is there's no need for apps in that case, right? But we've been talking in the industry for a few years now about so-called super app. And maybe in China, you see a little bit WeChat, right? Which is functioning as a super app, as they call it. You can get anything done from that app, but might actually be that natural language interface. The next super app, which gives us access to literally anything we want to get done. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, so I truly, and you touch on that because WeChat was one of the big ones. It's an aggregator, right? So if you think of that, about how you're aggregating things like brand creation, messaging, campaign, video, commercials, all that, if I think of from a creative type, that's going to be disrupted heavily, right? I think if one of the things, if I think of what I can already do with GPT, and we do this in some, and I'll reference some of this stuff later, but like channel strategy, market designation, targeted personalized messages, even virtual focus groups. Yeah. And if we move towards GPT 5.0, where we have multimodalities, the answering and recommending in full video audio is a true game changer. So think about this too. The SEO, the search engine optimization space, massive market, right? Yeah. They've now coined the term artificial intelligent optimization, because the concern is that people will no longer like use a search engine to find a URL. we now have to figure out how do we tune and get our websites, get our content, get our answers into the artificial intelligence models,
Right.
right? And that in order to be recommended, right? That's a whole new reframing. And that's a big disruptor. I mean, that's social commerce, multi-channel. It even has, and back to, Artie, you made a great point on democratization. This creator influencer economy, which is heavy in kind of APAC, but it's going to level the playing field here in North America and across Europe, because they'll have access to these type of tools and to market at a professional level that is unheard of and they've never had before. Right? So that's some huge pieces.
So Artie, I see you nod a few times in terms of, hey, that this might be the next real natural language super app. This, of course, also in terms of technology and architecture and platforms underneath has quite some consequences and some enablers needed, right? Are you already seeing that?
Yeah, no, I was nodding quite aggressively in that one. I think that's a very exciting point of, you may have heard, agents taking off, which is like complementing this natural language interface and this model and giving it the ability to use external tools. So you're still using the same interface, but then with agents, you can teach the model to, let's say, use an external app, use a calculator, use Wolfram app, or connect it to anything. And I think that really facilitates this super app concept. And we're seeing that. I think some of the recent stuff that took off really was like Auto GPT, or you can sort of have a model figure out, like give the model a goal that you want to achieve, have it figure out the steps, connect to the right tools, get the right feedback. And I think it's very not developed yet. So I think people are experimenting with it. I don't think it's fully reliable. It makes really cool demos, but I think it's a step towards that super app concept that you were talking about, and it's really exciting.
It's absolutely interesting, and that might be a step away from this idea of an application has a menu and a toolbar and a navigation that you need to go through, and actually we find ourselves simply expressing our intention through natural language. And the way we build our applications, the way brands would communicate with their consumers, with their target audience, might be very different as well, right? Mm-hmm. I've been talking to several banks already, actually even this morning a little bit, and there the idea was we have a chatbot, it's on our corporate website. How can we improve that chatbot? And we actually are inclined to say, well, how about no chatbot at all? Because ChatGPT would be the interface, and you'll have a plugin, right? A LLM plugin that simply gives you access to all your banking matters as well that you want to do, but you're not going to a corporate website and try to launch up a chatbot and so on. No, you're having this very fluent natural language interface, right? So yeah, Chris, that can have a lot of ramifications, right? In terms of let's look at this from a brand's perspective, how you're going to engage, how you're producing stuff, I guess, creating stuff, but then also bringing it to your client base and engaging with them and servicing them. How will that change the way these brands look at the outside world?
No, I think if again, I agree with Artie in terms of this idea of a content aggregator, right? So if we envision, how do we go from is this a change lever in brands and the way they create, produce, and sell? Honestly, that's a tough question, right? In fact, it's quite large, and right. So if I look at the massive disruptive nature here in this consumer space, right? And honestly, this goes back to the C-suite, is like, my competition is, I get this all the time, the question, it's like at dinner, my competition is jumping in, now where do I start, right? And the answer, honestly, is not that straightforward. And it's always different for everyone. If you think of like, it's like, hey, the question I would turn to them is, rather than the consultative cliche of, well, it depends, it's about like, how do I align to your corporate strategy? Have you really rethought, reimagined others? And so this goes back to some of the questions, we actually had this conversation yesterday about, well, how do we best do that? How do we define this strategy, integrate this strategy? And we do this by letting our clients experience generative AI firsthand. And we talked about, doing these sessions where we bring AI in the room. We call them AI Unbound workshops, where we quite honestly bridge the cyber physical gap. We create this immersive experience, but not only like, hey, we're going to show you a whole bunch of things about, we get AI in the room, right? We bring AI, we bring GPT, not just as a thing that's shiny object, but as a participant, as a co-creator, right? And then we start to look at these patterns, these efficiencies, and we help them really through immersive style understand, like, what does an AI advisor, AI co-pilot really mean for your organization, for your customers, for your brands? We take this what we call cognitive fusion approach, where you're literally side by side, you're doing breakouts, and you have an assistant. You can query it, you can talk to it, you can get answers, you can get a perspective. You can even ask it about your competition in the market, right?
Yeah.
You go
Yeah.
through this, we call it role playing, right? It's, if you're familiar with GPT, you can do these act as, so through a series of, creative prompt engineering, we do these things like virtual focus groups, right? In fact, we do something we call, especially kind of focusing on the consumer here about how do I shape it. Let's say I need a new creative spark in marketing. I need new product development. We do what we call a design storming session. We'll bring in AI to do A/B testing, a focus group, and something we've coined to use AI to act as a synthetic brand ambassador, right? And what we call atomic personalization. What does it mean to go all the way down and have atomic level information about your client? And how does that change how that recommendation happens, right? What does it change when I get instant feedback and I know where you are, what you're doing, and you like that Chinese or Italian restaurant, and I know that you order pasta and you eat it gluten-free. I'll go find all that for you, right? It's this cognitive fusion, and if I look at this honestly, like Google Shopping, right? We're seeing another example of this where, virtual try-on, but it's not like, a model or something out there. It's you. It's a representation of you, a 3D representation. You can spin it around, turn it, you can change tops and like build that outfit clothes. Those consumption patterns are changing at a just an unbelievable pace. And so, that kind of approach, these new approaches to sales, marketing, brand management, and others, honestly, are kind of limitless. So what we want to do is do these workshops to help them kind of funnel it all together and go, okay, your strategy, your growth strategies, but what are those adjacencies? And then how do I don't just want to have a call center GPT that, drops churn rates and other things like that. I want a growth trajectory. And I also, we see this like with a bunch of different companies. I can think of several different that have now looked at an ecosystem approach, like, looking at things like Dropbox, right? Where Dropbox actually wants to become a private content aggregator. And then like even that sense of, we have those ecosystems with already mentioned of this GPT for all. Yep. So, and we'll talk a little bit about how that's been open source, but I mean, that's a big impact so that it's democratizing all over the place. And honestly, that's going to help us pick up speed. That's going to help focus and look at what are those capabilities? Who do you want to be when you grow up? And now with AI at the boardroom level has to be infused. I mean, analysts are asking C-suite execs now, what are you doing in this space? And, the answer is, of course we are, right?
Well,
but that's something that's critical. So
let me get back on that stuff, because of course we have the follow-up report that we want to discuss some findings as well. I think we sort of explored a little bit the consumer perspective on this now, and how this will change the way brands interact. By the way, in the consumer report, we find the majority of people, more than 70%, actually would expect, if they're looking indeed for service recommendations, for example, or products, and they would expect actually this very natural front end to replace search in the end, right? So that is the overall expectation as well. So that's I think really interesting. By the way, the thing you said, Chris, also in terms of reimagination, I think that's very crucial. If we're just paving the cow path, right, that old path, and we're trying to make it a little bit faster, it's not going to do the job, right? What we actually need to do is reimagine. And maybe a nice tagline, we would create a sort of the impossible, right? You create things that we deemed impossible before, and now we see the technology pop up that actually helps us to envision things and reimagine things in an entirely different way. And I think that's a crucial remark you made about that, because otherwise we're still only making small stepwise changes, and that's not the expectation of the consumers, right? Because that's what we found, and it's one of the most important findings. We'll have one more finding a little bit later on, but in the meantime, let's go a little bit to the corporate perspective, the enterprise perspective. And so we see all the high hopes and expectations of consumers, and we'll see a little bit later on how they perceive the trustworthiness of all of that. But you already mentioned it a little bit, Chris. There is this new report, which is called Harnessing the Value of Generative AI, and it's full of industry-specific use cases. You already mentioned that 96% of the boardrooms have it on their agenda. So that's sort of, absolutely remarkable. And we also found, and I think that's a very interesting one, that brings us a little bit more to the corporate perspective, because there are risks, obviously. There are all sorts of different type of risks and security issues, possibly even copyright type of issues linked to it. But 74% of all the people that we interviewed believe that the benefits outweigh the associated risk, right? And with that, they also mentioned, by the way, that they realize that part of that risk also pertains to sustainability, because we know that these models are very energy hungry. They love metal as well, so you need a lot of very specific chips, not the metal by Metallica, by the way, but they love a lot of bare metal to run on, so it consumes a lot of energy. There's a lot of natural resources involved in the thing, and obviously, as a result of all that machine learning and inference going on, there's a lot of CO2 produced as well. Having said that, and a lot of people say we are very much aware of that, we know that there's even a scope 3 issue around sustainability that is directly related to this balance act around generative AI, but still 47% of the executives believe that the benefits will outweigh all the risks and the downturn of it. And then also 78% of all these executives we interviewed believe that the design process of products and services will be much more efficient and streamlined. And also, and that's good news for the consumer, there is 71% that believe that they can create more interactive, more engaging experiences together with their consumers, which is obviously what consumers expect as well. By the way, I see some questions coming in through the chat, and which is splendid, and do keep them coming. We do try to reserve some good minutes at the end to answer your questions, and maybe some of them we can pick up later on in the LinkedIn live chat as well. But let's look a little bit more at the corporate perspective, Artie. You are very much also, let's say, at the foundational level of this AI, because in the end it all comes down to data and process flows. So if we know that enterprises really want to embrace this, do realize the risk of all of it, how can these foundations that you've been engineering and working on a lot, how can they help them to actually be successful here in a non-risky way?
Yes, of course. And I'll touch on a little like what the adoption patterns look like as well from our perspective. So generally, people try this out as consumers. They're very excited. And I think some of the stats you mentioned were really exciting about how much they're excited about adopting AI into the enterprise. But then we do see people hesitant about that sort of, do I want to send my data out? I can't really send it out to an API. What do I do? So for a while, we saw sort of like, how do I get access within my environment? And especially we work with a lot of regulated industries. So we work with banks, pharma companies, government. And so, but we're seeing very rapid, rise in open source models that you can control, that you can host. So we're seeing a wider adoption of that open source models. And a lot of cloud providers are also providing hosted models. So like Azure provides OpenAI models, AWS provides Cohere models. So we're seeing that, for one of the safety aspects could be like not data privacy and data lineage there. So this rise of open source as well as cloud platforms, having the hosted versions is really helping, enterprises even use these models in the first place because they can't really send their data out. Then once they're able to use these models, I feel like they start out just experimenting, right? So use this natural chat interface, see if your task is possible. And I think one of the key things that we're seeing is in addition to generative tasks, some of the ones that Chris had talked about around like marketing, content generation, brainstorming, we're also seeing enterprises use generative AI models for predictive tasks. So, this is sort of document processing automation tasks, such as extracting things from documents, classifying things from documents, sort of this back office automation stuff that has huge productivity gains for the enterprise. So we're seeing that you can also use these large models for extraction, classification, that sort of tasks. And so again, once these models are available, you can start using them. And then often, to get to your final question, is often we see that they're not up to the par in terms of the performance that's expected. So they work really well on internet data. So if you're working with tweets and classifying tweets, these models would work really well. But if you're trying to work with your custom legal data, custom finance data, it may fall short of expectations. And so that's where that data really comes in. We sort of see it as the next step of, once people realize that these models are not just great out of the box, we see that data and your enterprise data is the key to adapting and fine-tuning these models, not just during prompt engineering. And so that's sort of that remaining key to unlock the capabilities of these models and get them all the way there.
You did discuss, by the way, just now, you were talking about more people are moving to open source. And I saw one of these questions popping up just now in the chat, in which people said, well, what's so what should we prefer, open source, open models, or these closed models? And a lot of them are closed as well, right? You see something happening there, and what's your perception of that?
Yeah, so I think the closed models are great to get off the ground, right? So even these hosted models or the API, you don't have to invest in a lot of infrastructure if you don't have it already. All of that is managed for you. So I think it's a very easy step to get off the ground. But I think when you get really serious about your AI investments and you're using your data to adapt and fine tune these models, we find that enterprises prefer to have those open source models because the capabilities are catching up. You fully control the model. So it's sort of your IP at that point, because otherwise that model is not really accessible to you. So I think that. And then I think the other thing is the cost, right? So if you're just experimenting, every call, you're willing to pay for it. But if you host your own model and invest in that infra, you get unlimited usage experimentation, and you're not sort of constrained by the charges of these models. So sure. I think that's sort of that trade-off of where you are.
And it's a trade-off, right? Because it's also a sustainability trade-off, I believe, because you might have all that dedicated type of hardware. You might be storing all of your private data in different ways. You might be burning your own machine learning cycles quite a lot. Yeah. So I do think your distinction between the foundation models and some even close can really get you up to speed quickly. And I think that's what we are seeing a lot currently around us. But then if you want to go deeper at the enterprise level and you're leveraging your enterprise data, the equation will be different. And this might also be in terms of compute cycles. And even if it's with a cloud provider, that might cost a lot of money. And we're not even talking then about, of course, the sustainability impact of it, all the way up to scope 3, right? So this will be a very interesting balance act. But by the way, while we have the microphone open for you anyway, I saw a question coming in for what are some of the specific use cases Snorkel is currently developing that engage these open source models and generative AI, because you are having quite a look at open source models. What are some of the use cases that particularly benefit the way you see it from open source?
Yeah, so we're currently primarily focused on predictive tasks, as I mentioned, although we are offering generative tasks as well. So what that means is sort of document processing, right? Extracting things from documents or classifying them. As examples, it could be for pharma companies, you have really long reports of clinical trials that outline what happened during a trial, things like that. And you want to standardize it to a standard format to then get insights around how to develop better trials. So extracting procedures conducted during a trial, what was the inclusion criteria, turning this unstructured data into a structured format that you can then run very simple data analytics on. Another could be for a lot of banks, a lot of call center analytics, not just sort of chatbots. So you would say, why did a person call to inform better product decisions and design decisions in the future? You could also say one of our banks is working with developing sort of a bionic banker sort of initiative where they are looking to extract a lot of information from deal reports in the past to then figure out for traders, giving them access to all this information at their fingertips. We're actually seeing that in a number of banks. So it's sort of that co-pilot, but for a variety of other industries. And part of that is taking all this unstructured data that's lying around, like just long PDFs, documents, and then
Yeah.
converting that into a usable format for data
A
analytics.
very unexplored area, right? We've tried something in the era of content management and search, but I think it's no comparison to what we are about to achieve and are already able to achieve, right? And there's so much information over there that we can use for analytical purposes, if I hear you right, but also I guess for creative purposes, right? And creating maybe the unimaginable, creating the thing that you deemed impossible before. There's, by the way, a question. We were talking about sectors. You just mentioned financial services. According to our research, so I would recommend everybody of you currently in the session, have a look at the research. All the reports are free. No, we don't need your data, your personal data. You just can download the stuff and have a look at it. And there you see a lot of industry-specific use cases. So we queried across all sorts of different industries, and there was a question, so what is the industry then that seems to embrace this stuff the most? And you will not be surprised to learn it seems to be high-tech particularly, as of course, trigger happy they are in terms of embracing innovation, because they have to, they are in high-tech. And that seems to be also the sector that has the most ambitious plans, but also already very active in applying generative AI across a whole series of business processes. I would recommend you, all of you, to download it. I think you'll find the link somewhere in the comments section. Hopefully you also see a link pop up for the Data Powered Innovation Review by one of my esteemed colleagues, and no doubt we can put that in as well. So I want to leave a few minutes, of course, for a few more questions, although I already inserted a few on through the process. But there is a third topic that I really would like to raise, because we go back to the consumers analysis as well, and there we found that sort of half of all the people we queried are completely unconcerned about the trustworthiness of AI. So they're like, well, fake news, or not exactly reliable, or maybe, as they call it, a hallucination. No, they all trust also the content. 73% of the people we queried, they trust the content that is written by generative AI. They're like, yeah, it's AI, so it must be good, right? People even trust generative AI to do financial planning for them. 53% said, yeah, we can do it. Medical advice, would you believe it? 67% would say, well, yeah, if generative AI gives me medical advice, I tend to trust it. Now, you could say that's, to me, by the way, that was a bit striking. I found this trust level much higher than many of us expected. So the flip side, of course, of that is, if that trust is being breached, then of course these high expectations backfire in a spectacular and very negative way. So we need, and we can conclude this in the report as well, that we need a lot of information and education around the topic, and probably upskilling some people as well. So Chris, that's a very broad topic, right? But how well do you think that organizations are prepared to actually deliver on these high expectations in terms of ethics and trust in data? Where are we currently? Are we really equipped to do this?
Yeah, so I will say this. So my being nice answer is actually not at all. But to be fair, it's not their fault. I'd say, my dad used to say, it's not their fault, but it's their problem, right? This is a classic case of what I call experimentation becoming scale when we blinked, right? And so, I mean, the proliferation, if you look at the adoption rate on ChatGPT, and we're talking 100 million active users in over a month, right? And now the landscapes of startups and ecosystems is massively overloaded and complex, changes daily. From the boardroom to the regulatory bodies, they're struggling to keep up. And the idea of like to put safeguards and guardrails, as you know, like any regulatory body, it's a 2-year study before they do anything. A classic reaction is the Italy banned for a month.
Yeah, that didn't work. That didn't work.
Yeah, just over GDPR compliance, and then they proved it and they opened it up. Look, I mean, honestly, if I look at this, frankly, the horse has left the barn. So retroactively regulations are going to be extremely tough. And the oddity here that I find is that the fear mongering, you mentioned the confidence of the consumer is like amazing. But the strangeness is from where the caution flag is coming, right? It's the actual creators like of OpenAI, of all these, and that should be a little more alarming to the consumer, but it's not. right? And if you,
It's not. It's not.
yeah, and if you
That's
look at it, it's like it's being embedded in everything. It's becoming pervasive. And now, and Art, you touched on this a little bit more, because it's now being open sourced with Llama and other things, and now these like the Nomic GPT for all, that means the pace of innovation is only going to increase. And so will this risk, this ethical AI, and I think of ethical AI as explainable AI, right? Which is where we should be headed. And I think that is a little bit. I mean, if you look at, there's more class action lawsuits than I have fingers and toes.
it's
Right?
incredible. Yes.
Yeah, and I think you see like the Screen Actors Guild, the Writers Guild, the
Currently going
Grammy,
on. Yeah.
others. We're talking a serious risk for folks like creatives and artists, around their voices. They
Sure.
can put their livelihood. Like I think of the Joe Rogan podcast, which is one of the biggest ones. Somebody literally took his voice and is now running their own podcast using a voice that's there. So look, I would say this because so what should they do, right? To not just go, okay, it's a big. I think the first steps. I'm a pragmatist, so industry self-regulation, and which, by the way, is happening already, right? You look at Adobe Firefly and Studio, right? They're actually now offering indemnification
Yes.
and auditability on pre-trained data, right? And from Photoshop Express, all of that AI imagery that built the model is now being, they're now certifying and saying, if you use it, you're good. We'll take care of you. Now, the others, like Midjourney and others, haven't quite jumped into that space. And now with open source, it kind of complicates it. I almost call it opening the black box, right? We have to demystify the explainable, right? Explainable AI is ethical AI. I think if we wait for regulatory bodies, it's going to be too late.
No.
But I think Adobe taking that first step, and I'd love to hear Artie's take on this too, is because of that open source and what she's doing. It's like we have to balance the stifled of innovation of others as well. Because there are other countries and bodies that won't follow those, and so this idea of losing the AI race.
Oh yeah.
Right, that's happening here is a real risk as well. So I'll land that there and ask Artie for some of her questions on
No, absolutely. And by the way, you used I heard you use the word black quite a lot, and deep fake type of things, and using somebody's voice. If for all of you that are currently listening, if you have happen to have Netflix or Streamberry as they call it in the series, there's a Black Mirror. There's season 6 of the Black Mirror, which is one of the most greatest dystopian future-looking type of thing, but it's not so much future. And there is a episode that I happened to see yesterday, which is called Awful Joan. And there, the life of somebody who simply has signed all the agreements and without ever looking at it, and they are faking her completely, her voice, the things she's doing with different actors, but they turn out to be themselves. She herself turns out to be a deep fake. And so I'm telling here too much, but anyway, it's a brilliant plot, absolutely brilliant plot. And talking about black, well, have a look at the Black Mirror, and particularly Awful Joe, and gives us a lot of insights in terms of, how ethics could go rogue, and how things could have a very negative turn. But again, nobody seems to be too much concerned with it. Maybe you are more concerned with it in the industry than the people that are actually consuming generative AI currently. So Artie, obviously you have something to say about it as well. I mean, you have been involved in a machine learning course, which has been taken by more than 300,000 learners, right? So you have something to say about this, I guess. And what would be your top 3, let's say, recommendations for organizations to actually leverage and lead on generative AI and bring it in a safe and ethical way to their audience, their target audience?
Yes, of course. Well, first, I've made a mental note to check out the Black Mirror episode. I was like, that sounds fascinating.
Very good. It's very good.
Very good. And I think Chris touched on some excellent points around data lineage, data privacy, the ethics and the explainability of it. I think one of the steps needs to be sort of, as you mentioned, educating the consumers on the drawbacks of these models, right? I think because most people didn't have any exposure to machine learning and AI, and now what they're seeing is ChatGPT, which can do exciting things and generate content, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And I think then they don't know the drawbacks of these models. So I think going to non-AI experts, people using these models and educating them on, here are the drawbacks of these models. They do hallucinate, or they're not perfect. You do need to tweak them, or things like that. And I think part of that is involving the right stakeholders in terms of working with these models, right? I think these models we've seen what hallucinations are is just that the model is just confidently wrong and just spews out things. And if you are not the domain expert looking at it, you're just like, wow, that looks perfect to me. So I think it's sort of creating these teams such that you have the right human expert in the loop to verify the outputs of these models. And they don't need to understand what hallucinations are. They don't need to know any of that. They can just look at the output and see if it's right or wrong. So I think that sort of verification process, and I think that would then influence which sort of use cases you take on, right? I think Chris mentioned some really exciting stuff around brainstorming, which, it's sort of a human in the loop process. You can quickly chat with it, figure out what to do. But if you're trying to fully automate an AI process without a human in the loop, without the expert, that could get very dangerous. So I think a lot of it is just like organizational design, how you're deploying, developing, and adopting these models. I may not have touched on 3, but hopefully that covered some of it. I could, yeah.
No, but it's also very reassuring, right, in a way, because I do believe, and we see the same thing, frankly, also as part of our ethics code for AI, to put the human in the loop,
right,
and realize that in the end, this is also always about augmenting the human, rather than pretending you're a human, because AI isn't human. It's decisively artificial, I always say. People always say AI, but the way it works is not like humans. No, what do you think the A stands for, right? It's artificial. It's just pretending that it's intelligent, but it isn't intelligent at all, obviously. So I think that there's a lot to do there. We saw a question coming in from the audience, Artie, and this was in the similar area. It said, well, are there validation tools coming or already available that could validate the content as it, for example, is created by ChatGPT? Now, is there actually a need for it, first of all, in light of having human-centered? And secondly, are you aware, if any, of these tools that might be coming?
Yeah, no, I think evaluation is necessary, right? Because for the longest time, before all these models, we were evaluating our machine learning models to know how good they are, to compare them, to know if a system has changed. So evaluation is definitely very important to know if the model is even usable. I think one of the challenges that's come up is before we used to have very neat metrics, right? Like if you're classifying a document, did it match the actual classification?
Yeah.
Now, if you're generating a summary or generating marketing copy or something like that, how do you know if it's good? Like you can't put a number on it. And before we had really strict numbers, you're like the model's at 86% accuracy, you went to 92. How do you know if a summary went from 86% good to 92% good? There's no such thing. And so I encourage people to check out, there's been really interesting stuff around like people are using large language models to evaluate other large language models. So there's interesting things popping up there around like you can have another large language model say like, okay, this is what a human wrote. This is what my model said. Are these two sort of similar and things like that? Of course, right. I don't think that's very robust as an evaluation system, but I think people are developing that. I think in the meantime, as we've talked about, putting human in the loop is the way to go. Having a human review and evaluate some of the outputs to know how it's doing. And I think you can build the UI in a way that makes verification easy and build the process in the way that makes verification easy. So I think currently there aren't as many, I feel, automated approaches that are very robust. There's no sort of going away from human review right now.
And you might even be tricked by this illusion of being more safe, right? And being more in control. Yeah. Where in the end, and I must say, I hear this through the entire industry, in the end, it's the human in the loop that will make the difference. And we all know the fool with the tool type of equation. So the tool will not help you not being a fool, but if you're an expert, the tool will give you a lot of productivity and creativity that you can shape to your own needs, right? I think that's a crucial thing. So thanks for that. And who knows what type of tools will pop up in the forthcoming, maybe we should not say months and years, but actually weeks or sometimes days, because that seems to be the speed, right, in which we see things evolve. Chris, I got a final question from the audience that I think is nice because it's a little bit more philosophical. It said, well, if I'm a non-IT person, why would I be interested in pursuing a career in which generative AI is involved? I mean, we see it for the IT people, sure, but if you're not an IT person, Why would you want to be involved in generative AI?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, I see this, but if you look across the spectrum of what is today's knowledge worker, right? And what does that mean? Like, if I wax philosophical, maybe a little existential on the idea of knowledge capital that exists, and so not like codifying knowledge capital within an organization means like taking experience, like the value of your experience, whether you're a delivery person with FedEx or other. I mean, there are things that, understanding, becoming part of this kind of next generation workforce,
Yeah.
right? It's going to be critical. And honestly, I think of like the menial. So like here's a great example, because we talk about this a lot with
We
other
only have
things.
a minute left, Chris. So be very brief.
Yeah. So like if I'm a mortgage claims processor, insurance processor, right? That is something that can be absolutely automated left and right. So learning and understanding and becoming kind of that human in the loop. We're not going to become trainers. We're not going to become, but it will be a job or the series of jobs that will evolve. And I
Yeah.
think it's important for everyone to kind of look at that self to say, what are those use cases? And then how do this is classic for anything. Like when the plow came in and now all of a sudden the
Exactly.
farmers had to learn to drive a tractor.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's the same concept. That type of that's the thing. It's like it's evolving, and now it used to happen in IT where you just had to learn for the rest of your life, But now I see this as democratized learning and a requirement as being part of that future workforce.
But isn't that great, And I think it's a very nice conclusion to this discussion as well. The fact that we augment ourselves with the next generation of technology and intelligence, although distinctively artificial, makes us also reimagine, if you like, Chris, to come back to your words, or rethink what we are as persons, first of all, ourselves. What is our unique position in this? How does it shift, right? And we've seen this with many waves of technology, although this is quite a breakthrough one. And personally, I believe it also pertains to the enterprise, because also the enterprise, in terms of how it unleashes its own intelligence and its own creativity, finds again out about their own purpose, right? And maybe reimagining their purpose as well. So I think that's the brilliant thing about something artificial. It makes us rethink why we are human as well, and what our purpose is in all of this. So I would love to discuss much more, because we only touched the surface, really. There are many more questions I see, so it's a very engaging audience here today. Even people complaining about the fact that I gave away a spoiler for the Black Mirror. I'm very sorry about that, but hey, I hope you... Sorry about that, Jorge, but anyway, I had to use it as an example. I hope this made you think a little bit. I hope this gave you a few additional insights on top of everything that has been discussed about generative AI. Do reach out to any of us if you want to discuss more. We will engage with you also on LinkedIn, because we see a lot of questions there, and personally we will also engage and give you some more feedback on it. And then, of course, you've seen the URLs. There are the 2 research documents by the Capgemini Research Institute, and there's also the Data-Powered Innovation Review. So thank you very much for being with us today, whatever time of the day it is. Thank you very much for that. Keep on generating. Hope to see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.